Hello and welcome to a potentially new series where we look at the cutscenes of a franchise and analyze them to see how they use different film techniques in their cinematography. Today we're starting off with Mr. Video Game, Super Mario. Now, obviously, Mario's been around for quite a while now and existed well before the existence of cutscenes in the first place. So in order to keep things simple, we'll be looking at only mainline 3D Mario games starting from Super Mario 64. But first, allow me to briefly talk about Skillshare, who have officially sponsored this video. Yeah, Skillshare is an online learning community for creators with more than 25,000 classes in filmmaking, editing and more. Now, the first 500 of my subscribers to use the link at the top of the description will get a 2-month free trial of Skillshare Premium. Skillshare Premium gives you unlimited access so you can join the classes and communities that are just right for you, and any New Year goals that you may have. Whether you want to fuel your curiosity, creativity, or even your career, Skillshare is the perfect place to keep you learning and thriving in 2019. If the topic of this video particularly piques your interest, then you may be interested to look into one of the many cinematography courses. Whether you want to learn about the different filmmaking styles, creative camera framing, or just the very basics, you can find all of it on Skillshare. Skillshare is also super affordable, and after the 2-month free trial will be an annual subscription of less than $10 a month. So join more than 7 million creators learning with Skillshare. It's genuinely a really good service. Now, Super Mario 64 has about 5 minutes of cutscenes in total, including the credits, but do be aware this game literally revolutionized the gaming industry with the very first use of a 3D camera tool. And the very first thing it does is show off its basic movements in all directions, flying under the bridge, turning around the view, and giving players a mind-blowing view of the 3D world it's created. And it helps establish the concept by showing off Lakitu with a camera and cutting specifically to his view, helping as best it can to get players used to how the camera works both practically and conceptually, as Lakitu will always be trailing behind Mario in-game, unless you kill him. The very next official cutscene is the ending, with Lakitu watching as Mario descends from the sky and lands on the ground. We get slightly more advanced techniques such as a reaction shot from Mario followed by what's called an eyeline match, as we can see what he's reacting to in the very next shot. We get a majestic twirling shot to highlight Princess Peach's presence, a close-up for the kiss, as well as a couple of fourth wall breaks as Mario looks at the player. After that we get a nice ending shot into the sky and the credits begin, mostly playing out like a Lakitu looking around through his camera. And as a final thing for Super Mario 64, we have the characters bidding farewell as the camera pulls away from the castle and fades to black. Everything's nice and simple, but does a good job of establishing all that's needed in a satisfying way. So, what does Sunshine bring to the table? Well, for a start, letterboxing, the act of adding black bars to the top and bottom of the screen for a more horizontal and all-showing aspect ratio. We also get a fancy cartoony transition with the M symbol filling the screen to reveal the next scene. The plane scene gives us a 3-part establishing sequence with a distant plane in the sky, followed by a close-up on the plane, followed by being in the plane to show the location of characters isn't just some studio somewhere. A pretty big one to point out here is full voice acting, for the one and only time in the entire series. For that, we also get a few more audio techniques, like how the cut to black at the end of the court scene works more powerfully with the dialogue and hammer sounds to end it off with a punch.
Mario shall not be allowed to leave. Court adjourned.
Also, for some reason, this scene has mostly no background. This could either be due to the limited resources, experimental film production, or to symbolize Mario's isolation. It's interesting, to say the least. Beyond that, there's not too much to say. It's mostly reaction shots, eyeline matches, and establishing shots or panning movements following whatever action is going on. Super Mario Galaxy. At this point, having most of the basic filming techniques established, Super Mario Galaxy uses a couple of techniques to get its tone out to the player. For a start, at the very beginning, the opening feels quite dramatic and in your face, and that's because as Mario is avoiding the falling meteors, the camera is staying low to his level. This is called a low angle perspective and makes Mario and the Toads feel more relatable as you are positioned in just a dangerous position as they are. From the perspective of Bowser's ship, this just wouldn't have nearly as much impact. Next, we get a flash cut from one of Bowser's flags to another one of his flags. A simple little transition from Mario's small-scale story to the much larger one of Bowser's. I'm surprised this actually appeared. When Bowser first makes his appearance, the camera utilizes what is called a dolly zoom. Dolly, in its simplest term, basically means a camera on wheels, and zoom, you probably already know. What's going on here is a trippy perception trick where the camera is being pulled backwards on its wheels whilst at the same time zooming in. Because of this, the perception of the camera is technically still in the same place, but the perception of the context around it is super warped. It's usually used as a crazy dramatic reveal or realization. Most notably, it appears in the movie Jaws. Here, it's because Bowser's such a threat. Nice one, Nintendo! Following through with that, Bowser's view next disempowers Peach and the Toads as the camera is at a high angle, literally looking down on them to make them seem much more small and manipulatable. We also get some cross-cutting within the sequence, where we see the cutscene edited to show two parallel events: the alien abduction and Mario rushing to the rescue. This is often done in films to make two separate scenes feel like they're occurring simultaneously. Most of the in-game cutscenes are pretty standard, so we'll jump to the ending again. When Mario dishes out the final blow to Bowser, it repeats multiple times for dramatic effect. And though that's likely all there is to it, I figured I'd use this opportunity to mention the difference in Western and Eastern approaches to action-based filmmaking. See, in the West, it's become common to minimalize the punch of a hit in favor of more hits. In films produced by Marvel, like Infinity War for example, they literally cut away from the frame where contact is made to make it faster and fluid, rather than strong. Whereas in, say, Jackie Chan films, some hits are cut so that they appear twice, though very subtly through just a few frames, making each hit a harder hit for the audience to really feel the power behind it. Just an interesting little tidbit I thought you might want to know. Moving on, when Bowser's stumbling on his little planet, the camera is probably as close to being described as handheld as it can be, being naturally shaky because it's not being supported by a tripod. Usually this is used to heighten action or movement, make characters more relatable and real, or like in this case, adding a sense of disorientation and lack of stability. And this is very clearly an intended effect because this was created digitally. There is no such thing as a handheld camera in the digital world. They would have to manually keyframe the camera to move in this jarring motion to replicate the feeling of it being held loosely in someone's hands. Everything else in the Super Mario Galaxy ending is fairly standard. So, Super Mario Galaxy 2. Presumably fairly samey to the first game, something it does try quite uniquely is give us an animated storybook effect for its opening cutscene. The actual shots in it are quite generic, but the heavy white border effect basically acts as an overblown vignette. These are often added to create depth and push a certain tone or to isolate parts of a shot. Here, it pushes the frame into that of a storybook. Nice. Beyond that, every shot is basically covered by what we've already mentioned. So let's take a quick detour to Super Mario 3D Land. Technically still a 3D Mario, just on handheld. For a start, it gives us the use of shadows and silhouettes to give a bit of a mystery to the Tanuki Leaf item. Every time Mario reads a letter, we can see it's a simple image in a classic Mario style. At a stretch, you could say it's a freeze frame, but at the very least, switching art styles is certainly an interesting crossover technique. And considering these scenes count for 90% of the game's actual cutscenes, the only other thing to mention is the reveal of Luigi's letter in the post-game, because it's animated almost like a paper cutout, through basic motion graphics animations. And the zoom into his chamber when you finally reach him has a brief animation and manga-inspired action lines for dramatic impact. Otherwise, that's all there is to say. So up next, Super Mario 3D World. As a start, we get one of the more in-your-face interactive pieces of music, as there's a clear jingle when Mario and Luigi fix the pipe, adding new life into the jolly cutscene. The movement of characters is also more theatrical in style, seeming to stop for the money shot of certain poses like a performance. Not to mention, this whole first take is just one big long shot. That's about as theatre as you can get. Makes sense considering the circusy theme of the game. Harkening to classic cartoons as well as the original Super Mario Bros, the game also plays a little with physics by having Bowser float in the air for a moment before panicking and falling to the depths. This is likely a reference, but fits into animated filmmaking as well. Same as the disappearing into the sky trope. And though it's taken all this time, we finally get a full-on tilting motion within a cutscene. Tilting is literally just the act of moving the camera to look up or down, but previous cutscenes have preferred to move the entire camera rather than just the angle. But on the final tower reveal, we get the full scope of it by staying in place and letting its size completely overpower the perspective. And finally, Super Mario Odyssey. What else can it possibly bring to the table? Well, beyond better graphics, the very first shot has some crazy fast whipping camera motion impossible for a physical crew to really grip players into the fast action of Mario vs Bowser. Those anime action lines make a reappearance, as well as an animation technique of freeze framing for extra power and effect, clearly pushing filming techniques beyond just real life filmmaking, but also styles for 2D and 3D animation. On the zoom onto Peach's reaction, there's a brief motion blur to add effect into the zooming motion. Progressing more into the more special effectsy style of this game's cutscenes, when controlling the first frog, the wormhole Mario seems to fall through has all sorts of superimposed images distorted and warped like a very wide lens as it stretches across the screen. This is something that can only really be achieved in post-production in normal filmmaking, but shows how far the Mario team has come to be able to add all of these special effects. The classic eyeball effect is also used here to show Mario's first-person perspective, which might be one of the first times ever in a cutscene, and the reaction brings back those action lines and that dolly zoom once again. Perfect for a shocking reveal. And though this is more of an animation point, I do love how the first boss Knucklotech's hands and face are animated with less frames, giving it a kind of jittery stylistic design to their movements. Now, as seems to be a running gag, the rest of the game's pretty formulaic and repetitive. So our next notable moment is the actual wedding, where in more cartoony fashion, when seeing Peach and Tiara's reactions to Mario's arrival, Bowser's giant hand enters the frame like a hook on stage to take them away. And once defeated, the moon base begins to collapse, and disorientation of this moment is shown by having both Mario and Peach shown at this weird angle, both looking way up onto them as well as portraying them diagonally, truly unsettled like the environment around them. And of course, I have to mention the Bowser capturing sequence. Though it's the same animation as the frog, it's cool to see these superimposed shots of all sorts of scenarios of Mario vs Bowser, with sprinkles of Peach scattered in there too. And a dramatic cut to black for the audience to process and build suspense for. And for the final shot, as Peach says farewell to both Mario and Bowser, we end on what is basically a freeze frame, as Mario throws his hat to the camera and Bowser is left falling to the moon. Practically everything except the hat is motionless for the final part. And that was the cinematic art of Super Mario, starting from the very first use of 3D camera work, to filmic letterboxing, to advanced dolly zoom shots, creative storytelling formats, interactive visual and audio cues, and finally inspirations from animation alongside more advanced visual effects. The Super Mario franchise has made leaps and bounds with the cinematography behind their cutscenes, as would naturally happen after 23 years. If you enjoyed this type of video, then do be sure to let me know, as it could very well become a series of its own if popular enough. Though I may have mentioned most filmic techniques there are from just this franchise, I really wasn't expecting to find dolly zooms of all things in this. Still, what franchises do you think I should tackle next? I can see myself taking on The Legend of Zelda, or Sonic the Hedgehog, or anything. We'll just have to see. Subscribe to see more Nintendo content of mine, or better yet, become a patron to get bloopers, early access to videos, and more. Find me as DazzVideos on Patreon, Twitter, or Twitch. I'll be uploading every Friday and streaming every Saturday. Special thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Feels crazy to actually have an official sponsorship after being on YouTube for all these years, and as someone who absolutely loves to learn all the time, I'm super excited to dive into many of their courses myself. Genuinely. But for now, my name's been Daz, you didn't really care, and I'll see you in a bit.
Hey, why wasn't I in this video?
Where was I supposed to fit you and Puppet into this? This is an education series. I can hardly fit IRL skits into this as well, surely. Yeah, but it would be nice though. You kind of have a theme going on your channel with us and all. Yeah, maybe I'll come up with something next time, if people want it. For now, I guess I'll just play it safe.
Yeah, that makes sense.